Well, this morning, I'm going to be sharing a message that I've entitled, Love Who? Love Who? And I'm going to start with a little bit of a difficult question. Yeah, love who? Has anybody here, you don't have to necessarily raise your hand, but have you ever had an enemy? Have you ever had an enemy? I'm talking about a bona fide, you and this person don't get along kind of enemy. That person who, if they walked into this auditorium right now, in your mind you'd be thinking, please sit on the other side of the auditorium for me. That if you saw them while you're out Christmas shopping at Target tomorrow, that you would honestly do whatever was in your power to avoid them seeing you. You'd think, oh no, I hope they don't see me, and you'd go to a totally different part of the store. You would leave the store altogether, kind of enemy. Don't raise your hand, but many of us have had those kinds of people in our life. An enemy can make life miserable, can't they? An enemy can eat up our time and our energy. Maybe you've done this. Maybe you've gone to bed one night and let's just say that this person who you don't particularly get along with, they've made life miserable for you on that specific day. And now you go to bed and you look at the clock and maybe it says 11 o'clock, and then you lay there and you just start thinking about this event or this person or whatever it is that's happened, and you're stewing over this, and then you look at, and it's 12 o'clock and it's 1 o'clock, and you lose sleep over what this person has said or done in your life. I had this enemy in college. And it was in my first year at North Central. I was living in the dorms, and because I lived, pretty close, only about an hour away was the school, so I lived pretty close to home, and it worked out pretty nice that I had this nice big stash of goodies, okay? Because I would come home and I would replenish the stash all the time. It had this big Rubbermaid container just full of like junk food, okay? And then I had one of those little mini fridges like most college kids have in their dorm, full of like pop or whatever, okay? And so my roommates, my first year, I had two roommates. One of them was from Wisconsin, one of them was from Iowa. And so they weren't making the regular trips home like I was. And so they might have had like little stashes of stuff, but those would usually get depleted right away. And then they would turn to me because I had the massive stash of stuff, okay? And so I kind of let these guys know ahead of time. I said, I don't really mind. My parents are blessing me with this stuff. If you guys want to, go through the stash, that's what we call it, the stash. It would go under my bed in my Rubbermaid container. If you want to help yourself, that's fine, But here's the deal. There's a couple things in here, like these Mike and Ike's, for example. These are like my favorite. So if you could just not touch the Mike and Ike's, yeah, that's cool. We won't touch that. And I said, the pop, that's kind of like my deal. Like, don't touch my pop, okay? Yeah, that's fine. We can handle that. Anything else, help yourself within reason, okay? We're not feeding the whole floor here. This is for you guys. You're my roommates. Yeah, we got it. So it was just a matter of a couple of days, and word spread down the floor about Conrad's got a gold mine down there, And so there were always guys that were knocking on the door, and they were always, hey, I don't have any food, man. Help a poor college student out and hook me up with like a Twinkie or something, And so there was a little bit of that going on, but for the most part, I tried to keep it for myself and my roommates. Well, I started to notice at some point that the stash was rapidly depleting at a much faster rate than it had been. And so then I started to notice not only that, but the Mike and Ike's were starting to disappear. And I knew I hadn't eaten them, and I had forbid the roommates to touch the Mike and Ike's. And then I started to notice that pop and Gatorade and what have you would start to disappear out of the fridge. And so naturally, the first thing I did, I approached my roommates and said, hey, guys, listen, the Mike and Ike's. Are you taking my Mike and Ike's? No, Ryan, we haven't touched your Mike and Ike's, Well, what about the pop? No, we haven't touched your pop. Well, okay, have your buddies been in here? I mean, when I wasn't here, did you have some buddies? No, our buddies didn't. So at this point, we've drawn the conclusion that floor 3 East of Carlson Hall, North Central, 1997, has a thief. They are stealing from Ryan Conrad's stash. They are a treat thief, okay? and a pop thief, and I was not one bit happy about it. And so I and you're probably thinking, like I actually was thinking when I was recalling this, well, why didn't you just lock your door? That would solve it. But the problem was one of my two roommates was actually what you might call like a squatter. They didn't really belong there. And he was just kind of living there like free of charge. It was this whole big confusing, but he didn't have a key. So if I locked the door, my roommate was locked out, and that wasn't really an acceptable situation. Actually, looking back, it probably would have been better, but at the time, that wasn't going to happen. So I couldn't lock my door. And so anyways, long story, slightly longer. I come walking in one night after a vigorous game of basketball down in the gym. And I come walking in, and I busted him red-handed. And it was this guy, Tom, that lived on my floor, that I trusted, that was a buddy of mine. And you know what? He had been sneaking into my room when nobody was there, and I busted him, hand in the fridge. He was like closing the fridge, taking a gulp on my Gatorade. And I was like, Tom, what's up, man? He was busted. And you know what? Honestly, you might think, well, that's kind of lame to call that guy your enemy. It affected our relationship because it damaged the trust that had been built into that relationship. And yes, I forgave Tom, and it wasn't like we were bitter enemies, but you know what? Our relationship was never the same. It was never the same, and I never trusted that guy, and I always watched him with like a distrustful eye, and I always had, in a sense, not any longer, but while in school, I had this little bit of a resentment because of what this guy had done to me. Maybe you've got something like that, as simple as that, and that's all it's taken for you to put this person in that category. I know enemy is kind of a harsh word, but essentially they're in that category of that type of person. You know what? They've disappointed you. They've let you down. They've taken advantage of you somehow. Maybe they've blatantly hurt you. And like I said, maybe we haven't placed that label enemy on them, but that's essentially how we treat them. When we think of them, it's not pleasant. When we talk about them, usually it's not particularly flattering. And so I wonder, again, don't raise your hand, but how many, as I've been sharing these thoughts, you have somebody in mind right now. You're thinking, yep, I know who that person is in my life. They are the sandpaper that just rubs me every time. They're just friction in my life. I know who that is. Well, here's the good news. Jesus has something to say about our enemies. You probably know what he has to say, but I'm going to read it for you anyways. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 31. Here's what Jesus says. He says, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you." Love your enemies. Now, to put this passage into proper perspective, I think we need to take a moment to understand who Jesus' audience is. This is who Jesus is talking to. He's talking to a group during his Sermon on the Mount that is made up primarily of Jewish people, almost exclusively Jewish people in this setting. And so he's sharing this to these Jewish people. And if you know anything about history, you understand that at this time in history, Israel is an occupied nation. It's occupied by Rome. There's a standing Roman army in Jerusalem and in the outlying cities. There's a Roman presence everywhere your typical Jewish person would go. There's a Roman presence there. And if you know anything about the Romans, you understand they're not exactly well known for their compassion and kindness, these soldiers. They're known for their brutality. They're known for their cruelty. They're known for their viciousness, perhaps. It's an oppressive situation. And so if you were to ask the typical Israelite about enemies, trust me when I say they understand enemies. In fact, they probably understand them in a way that few of us will ever understand. And then Jesus, he really drives home the point to his audience, because he uses that statement. He says, if you're slapped on one cheek, turn the other cheek. And then he says, and if you're taken from, don't ask back. Give them something else to go with it. And they understand that because again, under the oppressiveness of this situation, it was not uncommon for the Roman soldier to smack them around a little bit, or it wasn't uncommon for the Roman soldier to help himself to something that doesn't belong to him. And really, as a Jewish person, what are you going to do about it? If a Roman soldier dressed in full gear shows up at your fruit cart and says, I'm going to take a couple of handfuls of fruit, what are you going to do? If you stand up to him, that's a good way to get a black eye and a busted fruit cart. And so it's an oppressive situation, and they understand what it's like to have an enemy. That's Jesus's audience. Now, given that backdrop, Jesus still speaks the word, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Allow that to sink in. If a Jewish person, under the circumstances that we just described, could be expected to uphold that standard, I don't know how exactly they do that. I don't know how somebody who's oppressed physically and politically like that, how they look at their enemy and love them and do good to them and bless them and pray for them. What does that look like exactly to them? But if they can be expected to attain to that goal, then so can you and I. Because the circumstances they've experienced are probably far worse than anything you or I could imagine. So let's look back at verse 27 for just a few moments. Luke 6:27, it says this again. It says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. But I think in our culture, we've oftentimes reworded this a little bit. We've reworded it to say something like this. I think it's the next slide. I think sometimes we treat it like, don't hate your enemies, don't do bad to those who hate you. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, and ask God to completely transform those who mistreat you. That's our approach to this. And then on top of that, when verse 31 says, do unto others as you would have them to do to you, I think oftentimes we flip that and we treat this more like, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Do you see the difference between those statements? One is kind of a negative approach. It says, okay, if I don't want somebody to steal from me, then I'm not going to steal from them. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, do unto others, right? He said, do good. He said, bless those. Not just don't talk bad about them. Not just, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. No, he says, bless them. He doesn't say, don't hate your enemies. He says, love them. Do you see the difference? One, the version that Jesus gives, is an active, not a passive kind of love. Jesus is calling us to a do kind of love, not a don't kind of love. I was challenged by this week in my own interpretation of the golden rule as we've come to know verse 31. Challenged in the way that I approach that, in the way that I love, the way that I think about that, the way that I teach that to my kids. Guilty of that oftentimes in the way that I teach my kids. If my kids are let's say, calling each other names, I've taken the negative side of it. Hey, don't call each other names because you don't want to be called a name. But instead, I should teach them the positive side. Hey, let's choose, instead of calling them, let's choose to bless them. Let's choose to do something positive. There's a big difference between the two. That kind of love, doing good, blessing, praying for, that's a radical kind of love. That's a radical kind of love. To take that towards now we can do that as we're about to read towards somebody that we already love. That's easy. I can do that to Crystal pretty easy. But towards an enemy, towards that person that rubs me the wrong way, and now I'm going to bless them or I'm going to do good to them, that's radical. Our world doesn't understand, can't comprehend that kind of love. But you know what? When I say it's radical, that is not radical by heaven's standard. That's the prototype that Jesus gives us. That's the standard. It's radical by our world standard. Jesus gives a little more perspective here, verses 32 through 36. He says this, he says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend from those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So here's the thing. I'm guessing most of us are doing pretty good at loving those who love us, right? I mean, that's pretty easy to do. How many would agree that's pretty easy to do? To love those who do a good job at loving us. That's not difficult, right? It's not hard for me to extend an act of love to my brother Kevin. It's not, because I know that Kevin and I have a loving brother relationship, right? If I'm driving along and I see Kevin stranded in the ditch, it's not an act of love for me to pull over and help him. I'm going to do that because I already love him and care about him, right? If I buy him a Christmas gift, I'm going to buy you one, don't worry. It's not really an act of love for me to get a gift for him. Why? Because in a sense, you know, I know he's probably going to get me one back, right? I'm sure it's going to be something really cool too, right? He works at Best Buy now, so it better be cool. Kindle Fire. Sorry. HD 199. I don't really know much about it, but I'm just kidding. Truthfully, he says, yeah, right. Truthfully speaking, though, for us to exchange gifts, or for me to help him out when he's in the ditch, or, you know, for me to do that with Crystal, or for my mom, or really for any of you that we have an existing relationship, that's nothing. I haven't, you know, what credit is that to me? I haven't really achieved anything. Now, it might still have helped you and might still have been great, and you might still be thankful, and, you know, and it might be a blessing to you and all of that. I get that. But the reality is that that's not really extending myself in loving an enemy. However, now to take this to another level and to say, okay, I'm going to love somebody who doesn't love me back, who doesn't appreciate me back, who maybe doesn't say thank you, doesn't acknowledge it, that's a challenge. That's harder. And it's at the end of this passage that Jesus says something, it's very profound to me. It's in verse 35, and I love this because it gives us a good picture of who God is calling us to be. Jesus says, if you love in this kind of a selfless way, verse 35, then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to ungrateful. He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. You know, the same Sermon on the Mount is recorded in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 43 and 48. And in that version of it, it's recorded this way. Jesus says in verse 44 and 45, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Weigh the implication of that in your heart for a second. Nearly every person in this room, at some point in time, we've prayed a prayer along the lines of the following. Something to the effect of, you know, Heavenly Father, God, I just pray that you would make me more like you. God, I just want to be more like you. Or Jesus, I just want you to transform me to be more like you. How many have ever prayed a prayer, something akin to that? You say, God, I want you to transform me to be more like you. Many of us have. Well, here's a key to unlock what that looks like. See, kids have this incredible tendency, as we've talked about before, to want to be like their parents, right? Have you noticed that? Kids want to be like their parents. Your kids, if you have kids, you've probably noticed they like some of the same kind of foods. They might like to dress the same, especially when they're little now. Your parents of teenagers are like, what are you talking about, man? Trust me, the day is coming back. Give them a few years after about they graduate college or so, then they're going to think you're the smartest thing on the planet again. It's okay. Little kids want to be like their parents. Kind of disappears during the teen years, and it'll come back. Little kids, they like the same sports teams as their dads. They like the same kind of clothes as their moms. If their mom likes a certain kind of fragrance or a certain type of flower or something, the little girls like those kinds of things because their moms do. They like to bake the same kinds of things as their mom. Kids like to be like their mom, and not only that, but of course you know that your kids tend to take a very similar physical likeness to one of the parents, typically, right? People tell me, Logan, he's a spitting image of you. I don't see it, but I'm told I'm crazy for not seeing it, okay? I don't see it, but I guess, they say he does. They as kids tend to take the likes and the dislikes, the quirks, and hopefully some of the good habits too. This is the concept that Jesus is speaking to. He's saying, hey, listen, if you want to be like your Father, if you want to be as a son to your heavenly Father, here's a great place to start. Love your enemies. Love your enemies. If you want to model the behavior that Jesus has modeled, love your enemies. Learn how to love those who are never going to be grateful for that love, who are never going to appreciate that love, who are never going to say thank you for that love, because God has done that for us when we were ungrateful, when we were undeserving, when we were still wicked. That's what God did for us. You say, well, how? How do I do that? How do I go from despising this person to loving them? And it's probably important here to say something about that word love. In the Greek language, which the New Testament is primarily recorded in, there's four different words for love. So there's agape, eros, phila, and storge. Eros is typically defined is the definition for like a romantic love. Phila is a friendship type love. Storge is defined as the affection between like a parent and a child type love. It's none of those three that are used here when Jesus says love your enemies. The version that is being used here is that word agape. And agape is really defined by this. It's not an affectionate type of love as much as it's a sacrificial and an unconditional love. It's a love that says, I'm going to choose to be, and sometimes it's driven by sheer will. It's, God, I'm going to love even though this person's undeserving, even though it really doesn't deserve to happen yet. God, I'm going to do it. I'm going to treat them as if they are deserving. It's the kind of love that Christ exemplified to us by giving his life on the cross. We were undeserving, and yet he did it nonetheless. So he's not asking these Jewish people as he's preaching the sermon that day, he's not asking them, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go organize a hug a Roman soldier day. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying, that you're going to go out and from this point on, you're going to be best buddies with these people that have oppressed you. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying you are going to choose, you're called by your heavenly Father to choose to love them as though they are deserving of that love. To love them in that way and to start doing acts of kindness for them, to start speaking blessing rather than muttering curses over them and saying, oh, those filthy Roman soldiers, I wish they would leave our city, good for nothing, rotten scoundrels. Instead of speaking that way, speak blessing over them. That's hard to do, but to do it, and you will see the difference. So let's talk real life. We're entering into this season of Christmas, and you know what? It's going to provide some of us with opportunities that maybe aren't always readily available. And so here's real life. Sometime in the next month, this is going to be true for a number of people in this room, I'm certain of it. Sometime in the next month, there's going to be a big family gathering, probably towards the latter half of the month. And in your heart, you're actually dreading going to this thing. You are thinking the last place you're going to go, because that's what you do, okay, because it's the right thing to do or whatever, or somebody's going to drag you there, but you're dreading going because they'll be there, whoever they are. okay, in your life. Somebody's going to be there that fits the description that I gave earlier. They rub you the wrong way. They irritate you. I mean, maybe you've never quite gone so far to call them an enemy, but essentially they ain't a friend, okay? But they're going to be there. And maybe they've spoken things into your life, or they've even done something in your life that's left a mark, and you're dreading going to your family Christmas. I remember this gal I was talking with a friend really a few years back, and her family lived quite a ways out of town, so she didn't see them real often. And she was telling me about a time she was going to see her family over a holiday, and she said, Pastor Ryan, I dread going. I love my family, but I dread going because I know that I'm going to carry on my weight. Now, you have to understand, this gal was like the epitome of probably the ideal weight for a woman. She was by no means overweight, but she was certainly not skin and bones either. She was very well proportioned for a woman. Had nothing to be concerned about with her weight. But she said, that her siblings did have some unhealthy weight concerns. And so what they would do is they would project that issue that they were having with their own life onto her. And when she would come, she said they would literally ridicule her down to even 5 pounds of weight gain or weight loss. They would just critique her weight. She said, Pastor Ryan, I don't like going to this family Christmas because of what my family does. It's like they just analyze every last pound of my body. Maybe that's you, or something like that. Okay, that's a real life situation that I've talked with somebody about. Maybe that's you. And you're looking at your family Christmas and you're saying, I don't want to see Uncle so-and-so because, every year he gets just totally schnockered. And then when he does, he just blabs whatever, and it insults me, or it offends me, or it's maybe that's you. That's real life kind of stuff. For others, it's not that. Maybe you dread going to work every day, and it's not because you don't like your job. You actually maybe quite like the job, but you dread going because they'll be there, whoever they are and whatever they did, and those are all different depending on our circumstances. But you just think, you stress out about those moments that you're going to pass that person in the hallway, or you stress out about those moments that you're going to have to sit in a meeting with that person and actually work together because they don't like you and you don't like them, and pretty much everybody knows it, but what are you going to do? You got to work together. Maybe you dread that. Maybe you're dreading going to, third period chemistry class because that person that you were maybe romantically involved with, and now it didn't work out, but they're in that class with you, and you see them, and every time you see them, the heartache, it's brought back up, but hey, you got to finish the class. You paid for it. The relationship didn't work out, and no wonder you're failing the class. You're totally unfocused. You can't think straight in that class. Maybe you dread that because of what's happened. Those are real life type things that happen, and maybe it's for some people, maybe the person is long gone. Maybe they might have moved. They might be living out of state. You might never see them. Sometimes it's not even seeing the person. Sometimes it's something simple like a song on the radio comes on. Crystal's told that to me. She said, we'll be in a store and she'll say, a song from the 90s when she was a teenager will come on, and she'll just say oh, it's really hard for me to hear this song because it brings me back to a dark place, right? You've told me that kind of thing. It brings me back to just a dark place in life that I don't really want to go to. For me, it's an Elton John song. I could sing it for you, but I'll spare you, okay? I had this one time in high school, I was in college, I guess. I had this major crush on this gal. And it didn't work out, and she let me know it wasn't going to work out. And she let me down, and my heart was broken. And then I got in my car, and I had Elton John's greatest hits sitting on the seat, and I put it in. And I listened to that song, Your Song. It's called Your Song, You can tell everybody this is your song. There you go. And I listened to it about 10 times on the drive home, and my tears streaming down my, this was supposed to be our song, It was my own little moment. on County Road 2. I driving home. The thing is, if I hear that song and it comes on, because it's a Elton John greatest hit, so you hear it, you're walking in the store, and all of a sudden hear that song, and it takes me right back to County Road 2, tears streaming down my face. Now listen, the Lord blessed me. I upgraded majorly from that gal and got one that I would much rather have anyway. So praise God for it. I'm not like sitting here still embittered by it, but nonetheless, you can't help it. Things like that trigger in our mind, right? And you know it. You probably have your song, whatever it is, or you have something. Maybe, it's just a place. You drive by a certain place and you can't help but think of the memories or whatever. Okay, and so the thing is, we've got to. Did I give you too much information on the Elton John thing? So, I don't know. The thing is, this is where the rubber meets the road. Okay? This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we've got to learn how to emulate the type of love that is it's plain and simply said, it requires action. It's not passive, right? Because what many of us want to do in those types of relationships where we've been hurt or we've been burned or whatever is we want to just stay away. We want to shy away. We don't want to actually be active. We would rather just passively kind of grumble about that person from a distance, but that's not what God has called us to. Jesus has said, love your enemies, do what? Do good to those who hate you, to bless those who curse you, to pray for those who mistreat you. What a concept. What a concept. I want to ask you, what would it look like if you started to do things differently? What if that person that you have in mind right now, what if you took an action step this Christmas? What if you, let's just say, bought them a Christmas gift? That probably is the last thing you want to do. Okay, I've done that, by the way. I had a kind of a contentious relationship with a coworker at one point in time, and you know what? I felt like the Lord spoke to my heart, buy them a Christmas gift. Wasn't much of a gift, but I bought something that I knew that they would appreciate, and I gave it to that person. And you know what? Whether they told me thank you or not was not the point. Whether they appreciated it or acknowledged it was not the point. That I didn't do it. In a sense, I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I was doing it as an act of unto the Lord. And I did that. Okay, was it that easy to do? No, because there's part of me that's saying, man, this is hard-earned money, and I'm going to give it towards this person that I don't even like. But God stirred it in my heart as in a sense, as an olive branch, as a peace offering to say, maybe there's hope that this relationship doesn't have to be where it's at. Maybe it can get better. So maybe that's something you could do. Maybe there's that coworker that just rubs you. Maybe you show up and get them a gift. Surprise them with something nice. They'd probably be like, what? What? Maybe you actually send them a Christmas card. And make it nice and heartfelt, and you write something in it, and it's genuine, and it's words of blessing rather than the words of cursing that you've been accustomed to speaking over them. Maybe you start taking on some different habits around the work environment or around, for those that are in school. Maybe it's somebody that you share a class with, or it's in the lunchroom environment, or whatever. But you start talking differently about that person. And maybe you even know the whole time they're still talking smack about you behind your back, but you're going to take the higher ground. You're going to speak blessing over their life. You know what that will do? People will start to take note. They'll say, you do know how they're talking about you, right? Yeah, whatever. I'm going to speak good stuff. I'm going to speak blessing. I'm going to pray for them. I'll tell you what, when you start to pray, this works wonders. When you start to pray for an enemy, there's people in this room that will attest to this. It absolutely changes things. Absolutely. You start to pray for that person, you're going to find you don't hate them as much as you used to hate them. You start to pray for them, suddenly everything that they do is, because let's face it, these type of people that we're talking about, they could do something really nice, but because you've already made up your mind you don't like them, the nicest thing that they do is still misinterpreted as some sort of wrong action. How many know that that's true? You're like, they just can't do anything right. And you probably have it on the other side too, where you have like, I can't do anything right no matter what with this person. Okay. Well, when you start to pray for them, you actually start to be able to see through all the fog of, because that's what it is. A lot of it's all just misinterpretation anyways. And we're seeing through this lens of previous hurt. Maybe they've stopped talking bad about us a long time ago, but we can't see it. And so now we start to pray for them. God has this great way of breaking down those barriers, and now we can see things for what they really are. And we realize maybe this person isn't just, like Hitler's second cousin like I thought they were. Maybe there's actually some shred of decency in them. In fact, maybe there's more than just a shred of decency. Maybe they're actually a really great person that I've just written off a long time ago over one bad experience. Praying for them does so much in that way. And when we do that, the world can't comprehend it. So I know this is a big can of worms. I get that. There's a lot to this. I mean, we could talk about forgiveness and we could talk about trust and we could talk about healing, and there's a whole lot of trails. We just, there's just not the time on one Sunday morning to get into. And I understand there's so much of that stuff that needs to take place. So I don't want this to come across as callous. Say, well, this person hurt you, but you just love them. I get there's layers here. That being said, I want to encourage you and challenge you. This month, this Christmas, it's just a great time that lends itself to this kind of stuff. This month, what if you said, okay, God, I'm going to choose to agape love, right? Unconditionally love this person. I'm going to agape love this person that has hurt me, that has spoken ill of me, that has broken my trust, that has, used me, what have you. God, I'm going to do it. And I'm not just going to do it passively. I'm going to do it actively. I'm going to take to heart Luke chapter 6, which says, do good, bless, pray. I'm going to take those action steps. I want to encourage you, you can do it. This morning, on your connection card, I want to just help you just kind of take one step towards doing that. On the back of your connection card, before we put it in the offering bucket, actually the band, if you'll come this morning, you can. Right on the bottom left corner, with God's help this month, I will. And I want you to just look at, there's 3 options for you. You can mark all 3 if you need to or want to. But I would encourage you, with that person or people, or maybe it's people in mind, God, this month, you know what? I want to actively seek to love someone who's wronged me. I'm going to actively seek to do it. I want to do something good for them. God, I'm going to speak blessing towards one who has spoken ill of me. God, I want to pray for someone who has mistreated me. And you don't have to write that person's name or anything on there. Just mark that on your connection card. And here's the thing. I want to pray for you this week. Okay? I'm going to pray for you this week. The things that you mark on here, now we're not going to blab this all over the congregation. Okay, say Brittany Lentner looks like she has a hard time. She's got to pray for somebody. Okay, it's not like that. Okay. This is something that will remain confidential. And you don't have to share all the gory details. It's just, hey, this is where I'm at. We want to pray for you. Why? Because I believe in this. I believe that this is what God has called us to look like. We want to look like children that resemble our Father. This is one of the keys right here. With every head bowed, every eye closed, very quickly this morning. God, show us each one in our heart. Which steps? Maybe it's all these steps. Maybe it's one of these steps, God, that we need to take. For those that would say, yes, there is somebody in my life. Maybe I wouldn't exactly call them an enemy, but the reality is they aren't exactly a friend. There's contention. There's bitterness. There's hurt. And God, for those that do need healing, they do need help. God, they do need forgiveness. They do need to learn how to trust again. God, I pray that maybe through some of these action steps, God, as they are intentional about it, that you would use this, God, to bring about some of those things as well. I believe that will happen. God, as we take initiative, Lord, that you will use it to bring forgiveness and to build trust and, God, to bring healing where there's been hurt. God, thank you for this congregation. Lord, I pray that you would help each one of us, Lord, to love the way you've called us to love. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you this morning for being here, for driving through the fog, for making church a priority to be here, to worship together. It's important that we're together. Love this church with all my heart, and I'm so thankful for each one of you. I hope that you have an awesome, awesome week. The ushers will position themselves, and you can drop your connection card and your offering in the bucket on the way out. That would be awesome. I hope you have a great Sunday. Ladies, love to see you at our house tomorrow for Mocha Monday. Have a great week.